Good Sunday evening to you. I'm Danilo Evangelista, and welcome to our weekly off-season edition of the Tropical Weather Outlook. It is December 22nd, 2024. It is the Sunday before Christmas. Let's start off this week by looking at the NOAA Coral Reef Wash sea surface temperature anomalies. Taking a look at what's going on in our neck of the woods in the Western Hemisphere, in the Atlantic starting off. We continue with a very warm Caribbean, very warm Eastern Atlantic, especially off the northwestern coast of Africa, and also a lot of warm anomalies too in the subtropics, and then there's a little bit of more normal, cooler anomalies there. But then in the Gulf of Mexico as well. Now, this is very interesting because I don't know if it's me, but I've noticed, especially over the last several years, always in December, the Gulf of Mexico would be running well above normal in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. I guess that's a byproduct of climate change, that the oceans are generally warmer, and also that the Gulf of Mexico generally in the last recent years has contained a lot more heat later into the year, and obviously heading into hurricane season as well. Dramatic increases in upper ocean heat content. We all know that. And clearly it's still being reflected right now as in December, and we have well above normal sea surface temperature anomalies in the Gulf. I guess we've not had yet significant Arctic air intrusions with sweeping cold fronts coming down from the Midwest and the North, sweeping their way all the way into the Gulf of Mexico and chipping away at this warm water. But I'm pretty sure at some point this winter we'll probably get that, and we'll see these anomalies cool off. But if they do persist, this will mean very interesting things, especially when it comes to severe weather, not only just for the spring in a few months, but also potentially winter weather, wintertime severe weather, I should say. And we could actually get some of that later this upcoming week, which I'll go over when we go over the United States weather in just a moment. Moving our attention to the Pacific, we are watching, of course, along the equatorial Pacific, La Nina conditions developing. Pretty pronounced cool anomalies here. Once again, a signature of La Nina, and they've definitely intensified. I mentioned this last week. If maybe we compared it to the week before, these anomalies would probably be much more intense, and that remains the case, I think, this week. And once again, this is part of the idea that I think La Nina has really been trying to surge late, especially after weeks and months of it kind of not progressing much, especially last month. But it seems like over the last 2 or 3 weeks, La Nina has really kind of resurged. And you can see that in the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nina 3.4. This is by cyclonic weather. And you could see it, especially since late November, we've kind of just seen a very quick downtick, or a very steep decline, I should say, in the sea surface temperature anomalies in the Nina 3.4 region, basically the area where we monitor El Nino and La Nina, and the current value is at or negative 0.9 degrees Celsius. And the threshold for La Nina generally is right around negative 0.5. So at least in terms of the latest plots of the sea surface temperature anomalies, we definitely meet the threshold for La Nina. But these are daily plots. If we want to take a little bit of a longer average, here are the weekly plots from the ENSO update and status. This is updated by the Climate Prediction Center every Monday, so tomorrow there's going to be another update. But for now, the latest weekly departures, even then as well, negative 0.6 Celsius in the Nina 3.4, so generally suggestive of potentially La Nina conditions beginning to onset, and that's with the weekly average departures in terms of sea surface temperature anomalies. And then the SOI as well. When it comes to the SOI, we always talk about how the more positive it is, the more the pressure patterns in the Pacific are favorable for stronger trade winds, which in turn generally means more of a La Nina-like pattern. And the SOI remains strong. The 30-day average remains at 13 points We talk about the threshold being generally at around 7 points positive in order for it to be considered a solid La Nina atmospheric state, at least if you're measuring it by the SOI. 30-day average is at 13.7, and the 90-day average steadily increasing over the last several weeks. It now stands at 6.9, or nearly 7 points. So now the 90-day average too is beginning to line up with around the 7 point threshold, meaning we're also getting towards La Nina conditions in the longer term average as well. So it looks like La Nina is still trying to onset. And once again, this will mean very interesting things, especially over the next several weeks when it comes to winter. And it'll all be about how long does this cooler ENSO pattern kind of persist along the equatorial Pacific heading in through the next few months, which will impact the winter. It'll impact the spring, and then depending on how long this lasts, it'll be an interesting thing to see how it impacts next year's hurricane season as well. But that is, first we got to get through the winter and spring before we can really talk about hurricane season, because it's still very long ways away. Let's take a look at the sea surface temperatures, though, the actual sea surface temperatures instead of the anomalies, because as I mentioned, it looks very warm. And let's start off in the Gulf of Mexico, and I guess I can see why it's very warm. The 25 degrees Celsius mark still extends more than halfway northward into the Gulf, and even portions of the Bay of Campeche still remain at 26 Celsius, meaning 26 Celsius, if you're not aware, the baseline temperature that we usually look at for hurricane development in terms of, how warm the ocean is. And we still have some of that in the Bay of Campeche, and also this kind of northward poke. This is associated with the Luke current, and the Gulf Stream, I should say. They kind of go hand in hand. We still see 26 degrees Celsius kind of poking its way northward into the Gulf as well. So generally the Gulf is very warm in terms of anomalies and the current sea surface temperatures relative to what you would expect for December. Although one thing you do see, these colder shelf waters, and this will definitely become a lot more prevalent over the next several weeks once we start to get Arctic air intrusions from the north, and we'll probably see these 26 Celsius markings kind of chip away and retreat back south into the Caribbean. Off the East Coast, also very warm. We still have 26 Celsius right off or generally near the Carolinas coast, right along the coast, probably also shelf water mixing and cooling. So we have that. But just off the East Coast, 26 Celsius, and then kind of 24, 25, riding up along the Gulf Stream. So generally cooler and cooling down, but it's still warm. In fact, if you look at the anomalies, even off the Gulf Stream, it is still well above normal for this time of year. So very interesting indeed. And this will also be interesting in terms of how does this have an impact with winter storms or nor'easters that develop, coastal lows that develop, and then potentially maybe bring snow to the mid-Atlantic and the Northeast, or maybe it just goes out to sea. And this will also be something we watch in terms of nor'easters by the time we get to the spring as well. So we'll watch. But the Gulf Stream right along the East Coast generally remaining toasty warm for now. And then we zoom that out into the general Western Atlantic. You could see in the Caribbean, we still remain very warm, widespread water temperature readings. I was about to say anomalies, but these are the actual sea surface temperatures. Widespread sea surface temperature readings of 28 Celsius, generally very toasty in the Caribbean still. And if you look back at the anomalies, the Caribbean is also still well above normal for right now. So, and you could generally see that as widespread 28 degrees Celsius still remains. Although we are still cooling down, we generally don't reach the coldest point in sea surface temperature anomalies in the Atlantic until around February or March. So it's warm now, but it's probably going to continue to cool down, especially as winter continues to onset. So with that being said, enough of the tropics. Let's move on to United States weather. Here's a current look at the satellite image over the United States. Not much happening in the east. And then we have a weather system moving onshore along the west. This is probably bringing some heavy rain along the west coast, including California. And I also think there's some sort of weather system as well in the northern Midwest. And if you actually take a look at the watches and warnings, there are some advisories in effect. I think these are winter weather advisories, so I guess we could see a small snow system, I think. Nothing major. It looks like this is going to be some sort of clipper that moves in along the northern Midwest and could potentially bring some snow to the interior Northeast as well, of course, kind of skipping out on the coast. But if we're talking about snow, and we also have some winter weather advisories for the mountains too, probably associated with this system that seems to be moving onshore along the west coast. But in terms of snow, we could actually talk about not what's potentially coming up, but what happened this past weekend so far. We did actually get some snow in the Northeast, and that did include portions along the coast. You can see by the snow totals, I'll tell you here in New York City, actually, I have the National Weather Service from New York pulled up. Central Park officially recorded 1.8 inches of snow. So we had the first measurable snow, and this happened early yesterday morning and Friday night. It is the first measurable snow since December, at least the first measurable snow in December, I should say, since we had zero point 0.2 inches in December of 2021. So it's been a while since we've had quite a bit of snow in Central Park in December. Seemingly, especially in the mid-Atlantic, there's been a lack of snow occurring early on in the winters. Just generally things are a lot warmer now, and the winters have definitely been very lackluster as of late in the Northeast, especially if you're along the coast, like if you are in New York City. And then before that, in terms of measurable snow above 1 inch, the last time was December of 2020. So definitely a milestone that we achieved in terms of snow in December. It wasn't a big system though. It was kind of a quick coating, but it was associated with the East Coast low that developed and then kind of brought some snow to the mid-Atlantic, and then in the New England area, especially if you were near the Boston metro, some snow totals achieved above 7, even one 9-inch reading in Milton, Massachusetts. So definitely if you wanted snow, you got it. And then there was also some snow as well in the interior Northeast, 8.5 inches in Vestal, New York, and then seemingly just to the west of Albany, we got some pretty decent snow accumulations as well, 5 and 6 inches too. So maybe we could add on to those accumulations just a little bit over the next several days. And we could take a look at the GFS and show you that. You could see why there's winter weather advisories in effect for the northern Midwest. Kind of get a small clipper system that moves through, generally moves through the Northeast. Interior snow for the Northeast, or I should say snow for the interior Northeast, but it's a quick mover. By the time we get to Christmas Eve, it moves out. And then Christmas morning, that system moves out, and it seems like we have another sort of system that moves onshore along the west coast. And if you're in the California Sierra Mountain area, you could potentially get some heavy snow as well, including generally the Rockies or what I forgot. I guess it's the Rockies here in the west, generally expecting some snow as this system seems to move onshore along the west coast. And I think they kind of have an active pattern going. We have a system moving in now, a system that moves in Christmas Eve, and then another system, and this actually looks to be pretty significant, could bring potentially heavy snow to portions of Washington and along the northwestern coast of the United States, potentially maybe some strong gusty winds as well. And that moves in Thursday, and then that kind of lingers on, and then by Saturday, at the end of the week, another system moves in, and then I guess it's kind of two parts, and then Sunday we're still dealing with the system moving into the west coast. So very active pattern, it seems like. along the west coast. So we got to see the snow totals and the rain totals. But it looks like you guys could get some heavy rain and lots of it. And if you're in the Rockies or the inland mountains, I should say, the Rockies I think is generally around here. But if you're in the inland higher elevations, like I guess the Sierra, you could potentially get some heavy snow out of that. So very active pattern going on in the west. And then next week, as we get towards the end of next week, we kind of get a severe weather pattern going. Low pressure develops in the Midwest, kind of get a front coming, and then you could see pulling in some warm air from the Gulf of Mexico. There's a high pressure over the Northeast. This probably brings some severe weather. Definitely looks like a good severe weather setup occurring along the south central portions of the United States, especially over Arkansas, and this happens just after Christmas. Seems like it lasts several days, so Friday into Saturday and then into Sunday, looks like there's a severe weather system happening, and we'll see how significant this gets, but long range did actually hint that we would get a pretty favorable severe weather setup in the south for at least a week or so now, and it looks like this upcoming week might be the time to watch. And then really quickly to kind of go on to long range sort of weather. Let's go to the end of the year as we head into 2025. We kind of remain in this ridge pattern in the east. This is what's going to bring potentially a favorable severe weather setup heading into the end of next week. Get a strong ridge in the east, warm Gulf of Mexico air being advanced northward, and then we have a trough kind that comes in from the west, and then that kind of lasts for about a few days, and so we could get severe weather in the south towards the end of next week. And then as we head towards the New Year's and into 2025, a trough develops in the east, and generally that means a lot more colder air as well. And if we actually look at the 2-meter, the anomalies, we go from warm, that kind of is the scenario. I mean, it's cold right now in the east, but it warms up. We get a strong ridge to build in the east. The anomalies warm up, and then as we head towards the new year, we kind of get an Arctic blast that develops. And if we take it all the way out to the end of the forecast, an Arctic blast situation kind of develops. I guess we get a polar vortex to come down, and this could, I guess, be what the first significant major Arctic front that comes in from the north and probably makes it all the way down south, all the way to Florida. It seems like it brings cold weather too, and then we'll see if any sort of system develops, maybe in the Gulf or off the East Coast, that takes advantage of all this cold air. And maybe we'll get a pretty decent snow system along the East Coast, but we'll have to wait and see. There's always speculation when it comes to these Arctic blasts. Will the setup be favorable for snow? Will it not be? We'll have to see, but things generally look favorable as we head past the new year into the first several days of 2025. And there are people talking about it as well, if that could be a general favorable period where we could potentially see some more snow in the east. It all depends on how the pattern exactly sets up, but it generally does look more favorable for that. With that being said, though, going to end it off for this week's discussion. We'll update you on any severe weather potential that we get next week. Looks like we might get something towards the end of next week, right after Christmas. We'll update you on how significant that gets. And then, of course, if there's any major snow system that develops, we'll also update you on that as well. And if you want any notifications the moment I post a video, I would really appreciate it if you like this video, if you like what you saw today, and then subscribe. Helps you out if you want to get the video, if you want to get a video as soon as I upload it, and also helps me out in terms of growing the channel as well. So please, I recommend you to do that. Have a great rest of your Sunday. Have a great week. Have a great Christmas. And we will talk again next week at some time.